The annual Martinez family reunion was held every summer at Riverside Park, and it followed the same predictable pattern every year. My cousins would arrive in their newest cars, wearing designer clothes and talking loudly about their latest promotions, vacation homes, and investment portfolios. My aunts and uncles would spend the afternoon comparing their children's achievements like they were trading baseball cards. And Uncle Bob would inevitably find a moment to remind everyone that I was the family's greatest disappointment. This year promised to be no different. I pulled into the parking lot in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt that had seen better days. Through the windshield, I could see the familiar tableau of success theater that defined these gatherings. My cousin Derek showing off his new Porsche, Aunt Carmen displaying her latest jewelry acquisitions, and Uncle Bob holding court near the picnic tables with his usual collection of business success stories. Uncle Bob was my father's older brother and the self-appointed patriarch of the Martinez family since Dad's death 5 years earlier. He owned a small but profitable construction company, drove a truck that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that he'd made something of himself, despite growing up poor. More importantly, he'd taken it upon himself to publicly evaluate the life choices of every family member, especially those he deemed insufficiently successful. That would be me. I grabbed the cooler of sandwiches I'd prepared for the potluck. Simple turkey and cheese on homemade bread, nothing fancy, and walked toward the family gathering with the resigned determination of someone approaching a dental procedure. The conversations quieted as I approached, not out of respect, but because my arrival signaled the beginning of the afternoon's entertainment. Uncle Bob's annual performance of What's Wrong with Miguel. Well, Uncle Bob announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Look who decided to grace us with his presence. It's our little Miguel, still living the dream in that tiny apartment. The assembled family members turned to look at me with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed amusement. Over the years, I'd become the cautionary tale they used to motivate their own children. The example of what happened when you didn't apply yourself properly or make smart career choices. "Hi, Uncle Bob," I said, setting down my cooler and accepting his bone-crushing handshake. "Good to see you." "Is it, though?" he asked with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Because last I heard you were still working at that clinic downtown making what, 40,000 a year? Living paycheck to paycheck." The family gathering had formed a loose circle around us, anticipating the familiar routine. Uncle Bob performed this same comedy show every year, and they'd all heard the material before, but it never seemed to get old for them. "Something like that," I said noncommittally. "See, that's what I don't understand," Uncle Bob continued, warming to his theme. "You're 32 years old, Miguel. Most men your age have established careers, families, property. They've built something meaningful with their lives." He gestured broadly at the assembled relatives. "Look at Derek, he's got his own law practice, a house in Westfield, 2 kids in private school. Carmen's daughter just made partner at her accounting firm. Even little Sophia has her own marketing business now." Sophia, my 28-year-old cousin, beamed with pride at being included in Uncle Bob's success showcase. She'd started a small social media marketing company that handled local restaurants and retail shops. Respectable work that generated enough income to support her lifestyle and impress the family. "But you," Uncle Bob said, pointing at me like a prosecutor addressing a jury, "you're still living like a college student. Tiny apartment, old car, working for someone else instead of building your own future. What happened, Miguel? Where did we go wrong with you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a barbecue grill. This was the annual moment when Uncle Bob invited the entire family to diagnose my life's failures and offer helpful suggestions for improvement. Previous years had featured discussions of my poor financial planning, my lack of ambition, my failure to find an appropriate wife, and my general inability to achieve the kind of conventional success the Martinez family valued. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever bothered to ask about, was exactly what I did at that clinic downtown, or why someone with my qualifications might choose to work there instead of pursuing more obviously lucrative opportunities. "I'm comfortable with my choices," I said simply. "Comfortable," Uncle Bob repeated with a laugh. "That's exactly the problem right there. Comfortable is the enemy of success. You can't build wealth by being comfortable. You can't create a legacy by accepting mediocrity." Derek, my lawyer cousin, decided to join the conversation. "Uncle Bob's right, Miguel. I mean, no judgment, but don't you want more out of life? Better car, bigger place, financial security. Some people are just wired differently, added Aunt Carmen with the kind of sympathetic tone usually reserved for discussing terminal illnesses. Not everyone has the drive to succeed in business. It's not about drive, Uncle Bob corrected. It's about making smart choices. Miguel here has spent the last decade making poor choices, and now he's stuck in a dead-end situation. I listened to this familiar analysis of my life's trajectory while watching a black sedan pull into the parking lot. The car was expensive but understated, the kind of vehicle driven by people who had money but didn't feel the need to announce it. It parked near my Honda and I recognized the driver immediately. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Chief of Surgery at Metropolitan General Hospital and Director of the Trauma Surgery Residency Program. She was also my boss, though that wasn't quite the right word for our professional relationship. As one of the most respected trauma surgeons in the country, Dr. Hendricks had been my mentor for the past 3 years as I'd worked toward board certification in emergency surgery. What she was doing at a Martinez family reunion was anyone's guess, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. The thing is, Uncle Bob was saying, building toward his annual crescendo, Miguel represents everything that's wrong with his generation. No ambition, no drive, no understanding of what it takes to build something meaningful. He's perfectly content to be ordinary. I don't think there's anything wrong with ordinary work, Sophia said diplomatically. Someone has to staff the clinics and hospitals. Sure, Uncle Bob agreed, but those are jobs for people without options. Miguel had options. He went to college, got decent grades. He could have done something with his life if he'd applied himself. Dr. Hendricks had gotten out of her car and was walking toward our gathering, her expression curious as she took in the scene. She was a small woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of quiet authority that made hospital administrators nervous and medical students stand up straighter. The point is, Uncle Bob continued, oblivious to the approaching interruption, Miguel here is 32 years old with nothing to show for it. Still renting some tiny apartment, driving a car that should have been replaced 5 years ago, working for hourly wages instead of building equity. Hourly wages, Derek repeated with a sympathetic shake of his head. That's rough, man. Have you considered going back to school? Maybe getting some kind of certification that could lead to better opportunities. Or starting your own practice, suggested Aunt Carmen. Even if it's just part-time at first. You have to think about retirement, Miguel. Social Security isn't going to be enough. Dr. Hendricks had reached the edge of our family circle and was listening to this conversation with growing amusement. I caught her eye and nodded slightly, a greeting she returned with a small smile that suggested she was enjoying the show. What Miguel needs, Uncle Bob announced with the authority of someone who'd solved complex problems before, is a reality check. He needs to understand that life isn't going to hand him success on a silver platter. He needs to start making adult decisions about his future. Bob Martinez? Dr. Hendricks spoke up for the first time, her voice cutting through Uncle Bob's speech with surgical precision. Uncle Bob turned toward her with the confident smile he reserved for attractive women, especially those who appeared to be successful professionals. That's right. Bob Martinez, Martinez Construction. And you are? Dr. Patricia Hendricks, she said, extending her hand. I believe you work for Caldwell Development Group? Uncle Bob's chest puffed up with pride. That's right. Senior Project Manager. Been with the company for 8 years now. We've built half the commercial developments in this city. I know, Dr. Hendricks said. Your company handled the renovation of our surgical wing last year. Excellent work. Uncle Bob practically glowed with the professional recognition. Thank you. We take pride in delivering quality construction services. Are you in the market for any development work? Actually, Dr. Hendricks said, turning to look directly at me, I came here looking for Dr. Martinez. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but we have a situation at the hospital that requires his immediate attention. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear traffic from the highway half a mile away. Dr. Martinez? Uncle Bob repeated slowly, his confident smile beginning to falter. Dr. Miguel Martinez, Dr. Hendricks confirmed, still looking at me. Chief Resident in Trauma Surgery at Metropolitan General. I apologize for interrupting your family gathering, but we have a multi-car accident coming in, and I need our best trauma surgeon available. Uncle Bob's face had gone through several color changes, settling on a pale gray that matched the concrete picnic tables. "Chief resident," he said weakly. "Chief resident," Dr. Hendricks confirmed. "Though not for much longer. Miguel's board certification exam is next month, and once he passes, which he'll be joining our attending staff as a full trauma surgeon." The family circle had gone completely silent. Derek's mouth was hanging open. Aunt Carmen was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown wings. Sophia looked like she was trying to solve a complex math problem in her head. "Dr. Martinez has been my top resident for 3 years," Dr. Hendricks continued, apparently oblivious to the devastation she was causing to Uncle Bob's worldview. "Exceptional surgical skills, outstanding patient outcomes, natural leadership abilities. The hospital board approved his attending position last month." "Attending position," Uncle Bob repeated in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Starting salary is $385,000 annually," Dr. Hendricks said matter-of-factly. "Plus surgical bonuses, research stipends and profit sharing. Should work out to around $450,000 his first year, assuming normal case volume." $450,000. The number hit the assembled family like a physical force. Uncle Bob's annual income from his construction job was probably around $80,000. Derek's law practice might generate $150,000 in a good year. I was looking at first-year earnings that exceeded what most of them would make in 5 years. "Miguel," Dr. Hendricks said, checking her watch, "I know this is family time, but the accident victims are being airlifted to our trauma center. Can you meet me there in 30 minutes? "Of course," I said, finally finding my voice. "I'll follow you over." "Excellent. And Miguel?" She paused, looking around at my still stunned family. "Bring your surgical bag. From what dispatch is telling us, this is going to require our best work." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Uncle Bob. "Mr. Martinez, I hope you understand how proud you should be of your nephew. Dr. Martinez is one of the most promising trauma surgeons I've worked with in 25 years of practice. The hospital considers him a tremendous asset." With that, she walked back toward her car, leaving behind a family gathering that had been fundamentally transformed in the span of 5 minutes. The silence stretched on until Derek finally spoke. "You're a trauma surgeon." "Yes," I said simply. "A trauma surgeon," he repeated. "Like you operate on people. In emergencies." "That's what trauma surgeons do," I confirmed. Uncle Bob was still staring at me like I'd revealed I was actually an alien wearing a Miguel costume. "But you said you worked at a clinic." "I do work at a clinic," I said. "The trauma clinic at Metropolitan General Hospital. It's attached to one of the busiest emergency departments in the state." "You said you made 30 or 40,000 a year," Aunt Carmen added weakly. "No," I corrected gently. "Uncle Bob said I made 30 or 40,000 a year." I just didn't contradict him. The distinction was important. For the past several years, I'd listened to my family make assumptions about my career, my income, and my life choices without feeling the need to correct their misconceptions. It had been easier to let them believe what they wanted to believe than to constantly defend my decisions. "But why?" Sophia asked, her voice small and confused. "Why didn't you tell us you were a doctor?" It was a fair question and one I'd been expecting for years. "Because you never asked," I said simply. "In all the years of family reunions, birthday parties, and holiday gatherings, not one of you ever asked what kind of work I did at the hospital. You assumed I was an orderly or a technician or a clerk, and you built your understanding of my life around those assumptions." The accuracy of that statement was undeniable. They'd spent years discussing my career limitations without ever inquiring about my actual career. "I tried to tell you once," I continued. 3 years ago when I first started my residency. I mentioned that I was beginning surgical training, and Uncle Bob laughed and said that watching operations on TV didn't count as medical training. Uncle Bob winced at the memory. I could see him trying to recall the conversation, probably remembering his dismissive response to what he'd assumed was another one of my unrealistic fantasies. "You just let us think you were failing," Derek said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and accusation. "I let you think what you wanted to think," I corrected. "Your assumptions about my life said more about your expectations than about my reality." "But the apartment," Aunt Carmen said desperately, grasping for some way to make sense of the situation. You said you lived in a tiny apartment. I do live in a tiny apartment, I confirmed. A one-bedroom place about 6 blocks from the hospital. It's small because I'm rarely home, and when I am home I'm usually sleeping. I don't need much space. But you could afford something bigger, Sophia said. With that kind of salary you could afford a house. A really nice house. I could, I agreed. But I'm saving for other things. What other things? This was the conversation I'd been avoiding for years, not because I was ashamed of my goals, but because I'd learned that my family's idea of success didn't align with my own priorities. Medical school left me with $200,000 in student loans, I explained. I've been living modestly so I can pay those off as quickly as possible. Once they're gone, I'm planning to start a free clinic in the underserved part of town. A free clinic, Uncle Bob repeated, his voice flat with incomprehension. Most trauma surgery happens to people who can't afford trauma surgeons, I said. Motorcycle accidents, workplace injuries, domestic violence cases. I want to establish a clinic that can provide emergency surgical care regardless of insurance status. But why? Derek asked. I mean, that's noble and everything, but why give up the income? You could make millions in private practice. Because saving lives is more important than accumulating wealth, I said simply. The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Martinez family had always believed about success and achievement. They'd spent decades measuring worth in terms of income, possessions, and social status. The idea that someone might deliberately choose service over wealth was foreign to their understanding of rational decision-making. Miguel, Uncle Bob said slowly, I owe you an apology. A really big apology. You owe me respect, I corrected. Apologies are nice, but what I want is for my family to stop making assumptions about my life and start asking questions about what I'm actually doing. Dr. Martinez, Derek said, testing out the title. I still can't believe you're a surgeon. I mean, I can believe it now, but it's hard to reconcile with your assumptions about who I was supposed to be, I finished. Yeah. I looked around at my family, people I loved despite their flaws, people who'd spent years underestimating me because I didn't fit their definition of success. The revelation about my career wouldn't immediately change our relationship dynamics, but it was a start. There's something else you should know, I said, pulling out my phone and checking a text message that had just arrived. The attending position Dr. Hendricks mentioned? It comes with additional responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? Aunt Carmen asked nervously, probably bracing for another revelation that would further upend her understanding of my life. I'll be directing the trauma surgery residency program, I said. Teaching the next generation of emergency surgeons. It's a significant honor. Most doctors wait years for that kind of appointment. Teaching other doctors, Sophia said wonderingly. You're going to be teaching other doctors. I already teach other doctors, I said. I've been supervising junior residents and medical students for the past 2 years. It's one of the most rewarding parts of the job. My phone buzzed again with another message from the hospital. The accident victims were arriving and they needed me there immediately. I have to go, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. People's lives are depending on the surgical team being ready when they arrive. Of course, Uncle Bob said quickly. Go save lives. We'll talk more later. As I walked toward my Honda Civic, which suddenly looked less like a symbol of failure and more like practical transportation for someone who spent most of his time at work, I could hear my family beginning to process what they'd learned. A trauma surgeon, I heard Derek saying to Sophia. Our cousin Miguel is a trauma surgeon. Who's going to make $450,000 a year, Sophia replied. Plus bonuses. And he's been living in that tiny apartment by choice, Aunt Carmen added. To pay off student loans faster. I got in my car and started the engine, glancing back at the family gathering one more time. Uncle Bob was sitting heavily on a picnic bench, staring at the ground like he was trying to solve a difficult puzzle. The rest of my relatives were clustered in small groups, probably comparing notes on every conversation they'd ever had with me and wondering what other assumptions they'd gotten wrong. As I drove toward the hospital, my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Dr. Hendricks' voice filled the car. Miguel, I hope I didn't cause too much family drama back there. Nothing that wasn't a long time coming, I said. But I'm curious, how did you know where to find me? Your cousin Sophia, she said with a laugh. She handles social media for that new restaurant downtown, the one where I had lunch yesterday. She was posting pictures from your family reunion and I recognized you in the background. I figured it was a good opportunity to meet your family. And the multi-car accident? Very real, unfortunately. 3 vehicles, 7 victims, 2 in critical condition. We'll need your best work today. On my way, I said, switching into the professional mindset that had carried me through years of medical training and residency. Family drama would have to wait. People needed surgery and I was one of the few people in the city qualified to provide it. 20 minutes later, I was scrubbed in and standing over a trauma patient, my hands working to repair damage that would have been fatal without immediate surgical intervention. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd sacrificed for, what I'd chosen over the conventional markers of success my family valued. 6 hours later, after successfully completing 3 emergency surgeries and stabilizing 4 other patients, I finally had a chance to check my phone. I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from various family members. The messages ranged from simple expressions of amazement, "I can't believe you're a doctor," to more complex attempts to process the day's revelations. "Mom wants to know if you need help furnishing a bigger apartment." But the one that mattered most was from Uncle Bob. "Miguel, I spent years talking about building something meaningful with your life. Today I learned you've been doing exactly that and I was too blind to see it. I'm proud of you and I'm sorry it took me so long to say that." I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow I'd call him back and we'd start rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than misplaced assumptions. But tonight I was going home to my tiny apartment, proud of the lives I'd saved and satisfied with the choices I'd made. Sometimes the most meaningful success isn't visible to people who only know how to measure wealth and status. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well even when nobody notices you're doing it.